Hi BookTube! So, it's getting towards the end of the year. Goblinmas is fast approaching. So I thought I would do a bit of a summary of my reading from this year. I'll at least cover the best and the worst books that I've read this year. We'll start with the best. Or should we save the best for last? That's what I do with my food. No. We'll start with the best. Now, I think I'll just go through this in a sort of chronological order. As in the order I read them in, rather than a best of the best to the worst of the best. Whew. That's confusing. So, I'm just going to go through some of my favourite books. These were all 5-star reads for me this year. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Nevernight by J. Christoph. And subsequently God's Grave, the sequel to it. Might as well talk about them both at once. If you haven't read it, you should. And what it is a fantasy about assassins. Mainly about one particular assassin, a teenage girl who is a bit witchy, in that she has a magical cat made of shadows, and some elusive magical abilities, perhaps? Anyway, it's a really fun read, in that the first book is Assassin's School, and it has a bit of that sort of Hogwartsy feel to it, with a bit more murdering, all set in quite a well-built world, with some really great plot twists. So, there we go, books 1 and 2 on the list, I suppose. Next up was a bit of a surprise book, actually. I read The Children of Time. It's a sci-fi, bit of a high-concept sci-fi, really, about the sped-up evolution of spiders into a sort of human-like society, competing with humans who created them thousands of years in the future. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it to do it sufficient justice, but it's got some really great thought gone into it, into how social concepts could be interpreted differently. If you're at all interested in sci-fi, I would suggest giving this a go. Definitely a 5-star read for me. Next on my best of 2018 list is The Way of Kings. Or perhaps I should say The Stormlight Archive, where The Way of Kings is book 1, and Words of Radiance is book 2. They were both definitely 5-star reads for me. Book 3, arguably only a 4-star. Yeah, you can't have it all. This is the first few books in a truly epic fantasy series by Brandon Sanderson, in quite a sort of Wheel of Time sort of epic style. And it really drew me in. I couldn't help but buy every book that is available of the Stormlight Archive and read them in quite quick succession. But they are quite long books, so I guess you have to be into that sort of thing. But if you are at all, these should be near the top of your reading list. Then, I've got Kings of the Wild. This is much less epic, but still fantasy, with a heavy dollop of humour. And it genuinely made me laugh, which there's not many books where I actually laugh out loud. And this is one of them. It's a bit like a David Gemmell novel, like Trust the Legend, smushed together with Terry Pratchett, with a load of surreal fantasy humour, with a great cast of characters that are introduced at a really good pace. So here's one I'd recommend if you want some more light-hearted fantasy adventure. While there is a sequel, this is really a standalone novel, and a very enjoyable one. Now, the last entry on my best of 20, what is it in human years? 2018. Best of 2018. This book has just snuck on at the last minute. I've only recently finished it, and I haven't actually done a proper review for it yet, but it does belong on this list, because I've read it, and it'll definitely be a 5-star review. That is Cruel Reality. You probably won't have heard of this one, whereas all those others you may have seen elsewhere. This is an indie book. I've been trying to read more indie books recently, and I'm inclined to say it's really paying off. So this is unusual for more than one reason, apart from it being an indie book, and I haven't reviewed many of those, but it's also not fantasy or sci-fi. Whereas you will have noticed most of the books I read are either fantasy or sci-fi. But this one is contemporary, sort of. It's quite genre-defying. I've seen other reviews of it call it a sort of dystopian, like The Hunger Games. And while I can see the comparison there because of what's happening in the plot, this is actually set in the modern human world. I suppose it is a bit people thrown into a kill or be killed situation, a bit like The Hunger Games, but in a way where if you were a human in denial of goblins and stuff, you might really believe it could happen. A really thrilling story that provoked a lot of questions about human behaviour, and how people who are kidnapped from their day jobs as bus drivers and nurses and things, thrown into a murderous situation, might behave. I don't quite know how to say much else about it without giving spoilers, other than to say, yeah, a really interesting indie book, very affordable on Kindle, so give it a try. I really will have to put in some thought into how to review this properly, probably after Goblinmas now. So that's my list of best of 2018 books. Moving on to some of the worst books I read this year. Now, I'm going to caveat this heavily in that these are the worst books I've read and reviewed this year. That does not mean they are the worst books of the year, in that if a book is really terrible, I don't finish reading it. I'll probably read the first 4 or 5 chapters and say, this sucks. So I'll ignore it and pretend it never happened. So the fact that I finished these books means they're not that bad. I'm probably never going to do a 1-star review for those reasons. If it was a 1-star book, I wouldn't have read it in the first place. There's only a few of these, so I'll rattle through them quickly. The first book, appropriately named, First Year. I'll be honest, I don't really remember why I disliked this book that much. It was all very predictable and formulaic, generally uninspiring. 2-star. Another 2-star book, although this one probably was bordering on 1-star, it was even worse than that first one, is The Wretched of Muirwood. A very slow, boring book that made almost no sense in a poorly built world with a ridiculous magic system. Not really sure why I went on with reading that. Bad Goblin. You've wasted your own time there. You should be ashamed of yourself. And the final book I'll put on this list, and it was significantly better than those others. It was a 3-star book, and this is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Now this is actually quite a well-written book, just had really poor pacing. I found it a bit predictable, and I thought all the characters were quite boring, with some of them bordering on being pointless. Yeah, no more need to dwell on that, I think. So, those are my best. Those are my worst. There was probably a bunch of honourable mentions, sort of 4-star books, that I can't be bothered to talk about. If you're interested, I'll have videos on them all on my channel. Every book that I actually review gets its own full video, so go check them out. So that's it. I may have a brief hibernation through Goblinmas. So perhaps I'll see you in the new year. Bye.